something we saw on Facebook recently. Someone said, they said, I'm not sure who needs to be aware of this, but worship is not supposed to sound like R&B. If you want to be an R&B singer, then just say that, beloved. But let's keep it out of the house of God. Well, that is interesting. That is interesting.
Very loaded.
Who wants to hop into this thing first?
I mean, I'm gonna go into it first,
Okay.
because we see this a lot, right? There are people who try to make church like sound a particular way. So it says like church is not, worship is not supposed to be R&B. So when did Satan begin to own rhythm and blues? Like, first of all, rhythm, that's black people. We own that. Let's start with that.
That's gonna beat it.
Blues comes out of the church. So you can't tell me that rhythm and blues can't be a worship to God. And that's the kind of stuff that annoys me, because if I want to tell God I love you, God, and put this beat to it and bob my head, now all of a sudden I'm not allowed in the church or something. And that makes no sense. There's no scriptural basis for that at all.
Yeah. Well, what I think of when I think of worship, I think of Cain and Abel. And Cain brought his offering, his worship to God, and Abel brought his to God. And the issue was not what they brought. It was the heart posture behind what they brought.
Yes, that's good.
Right?
I was feeling some stuff sometimes.
Just a little bit every once in a while, you feel me?
A little tidbit.
And so, in that situation, Abel brings his best to God. Cain does not. And that's the issue that God had. Not did Cain bring a lamb, but what was your heart behind bringing something to me? Oh, I got to bring an offering, so let me just grab whatever and just bring it. And that is what worship is. So if you choose to worship through song, the genre is not what God's going to look at. What he's going to look at is, what is your heart posture in this worship?
Gotcha.
And that is what people oftentimes get messed up at, because I believe sometimes the R&B sounding things that we hear in church is a problem, but not because it sounds like R&B, but because somebody got up there to simply go through the motions because I'm in church.
Before we continue on a little bit further in regards to that, how would you define worship? Like, within itself, what do you define worship? If you were teaching a child and they don't understand what worship is, what's your definition of it?
Oh, you hit me because I guess I got a kid, huh? No, that's a very good question, which I think something that we actually do need to talk about, in the church. But when you worship God and you're adoring God and you're loving on God, you're pouring out who you are out of gratitude. Yeah. And I'm telling God, I'm thankful for what you've done for me. I thank you for just picking me, and I acknowledge you as God, and I make you bigger than anything else. It's a posture of your heart, like Miles was saying. I'm putting my whole heart out to say you are bigger than anything and everything in my life. And I don't know how you can say, okay, but that can't have a sound to it.
True. I definitely want to build upon that too, because when I think about worship in the literal sense, worship in definition doesn't necessarily mean it's to God. You can worship anything.
Absolutely.
So worship can be applied to a job. It can be applied to a team.
A car.
It can be applied to a car. It's just basically lifting that thing over all, or lifting it, or giving it, or esteeming that thing. So when I go into worship or worship in the church, my posture is to esteem God, to give God the glory, to thank Him for what He's done, just for who He is. And so when we look at music and how it's presented in the church, first of all, there's church worship songs that I don't like. And that's just because stylistically, it don't sound good to me.
It don't.
I'm just not a fan of maybe the artist that much.
Absolutely.
Not because I disagree with their posture or what they're trying to represent as far as getting a message out. And, it works for some people. But there's certain, gospel songs that I just don't like just because stylistically. Is it wrong for me to do so? I don't believe so. I believe it's okay, everybody to each their own. So I can understand why somebody would make a comment like that because they don't really like the content or the sonics of what's being presented. But to then almost deify that is where we get into where I start to disagree.
Yeah.
Because everybody has their own walk and their own pathway and their own form of worship and posturing to God that is true to them. And as long as you're worshiping in spirit and in truth, I believe that's what we need to be lifting up, rather than saying, "Oh, you can't do this in the church."
Yeah. Like, what's the scripture? Everything you do it unto the Lord. So everything I do is a worship to God. Exactly. So if I happen to play music in an R&B style, it's gonna be worship. Like, everything that comes out of me is gonna be a worship unto God. And another issue I really took with that is, I'm reading through like church history and stuff, and there's a lot of Orthodox churches that don't use music at all, like no instruments at all. Like, I was reading, they were saying because it's like it reminds them of the circus and all this stuff. Like, they have their own reasons for it. So what I'm saying is, you and your Kojic mindset, high and mighty, with your Kojic music. But there's other churches who they can trace their history way farther back than you can, and they do no music at all. So if you think you're high and mighty because you have church sound, and they say there should be no music at all, you get what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, just worship God how you worship God.
And church sound, I'm glad you said that, because there's some people who say what the church should sound like. Now, if you're like us, you spent time in different kinds of churches. Which means the sound
changes
of church is drastically different from one place to another. For example, generally speaking, the sound of black church music does sound like R&B. It is the rhythm and blues, because that genre of music literally comes out of the church. Literally, folks doing extra runs and stuff, and all that is a mimic of someone who is singing to God in church. And they said, that sounds good, let me mimic that when I sing over here, right? So our music sounds like that, generally speaking, as it is. And then if you go to some other folks who probably got, a paler complexion and longer, wavier, flaffier hair, you know what I'm saying? Their music sounds more like country, generally speaking.
And we just love you, God.
Sounds more like soft rock. You feel me? And so at what point did the people stop worshiping God? Because what your worship sounds like, it should sound like my reverence and my intent to let God know how I feel about him from my heart.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, what that sounds like, it's probably going to be based upon where you grew up.
True. And I believe there's to kind of piggyback off of that, I believe there's a time and place for, so I think within the time and place, sound may change. So we're in these times. If we were to take what we call traditional Christian music or traditional gospel music back 90 years ago, they would look at us like, this ain't what is this?
Y'all going to hell.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't care who's listening to this, whether you're 30 years my elder or 10 years my younger, there is no specific church sound that you may think it is. Now, of course, because what you grew up on or resonated with, I understand. And the thing is, I do believe, like, there's places for people to be, in the sense, like, if you like this sound, if this really helps you get to Christ and get to God in worship, and you enjoy the music or the presentation at a church, and that helps you, absolutely, by all means, that's where you want to be. Because anything that brings you closer to God, it should be, should be a no-brainer. You should want to be a part of something like that. But you have to remember that your way or your walk with Christ isn't everyone's. But ultimately, we want to be walking with Christ, and that's the basis of what we want to work off of. That's the baseline. And because there's beautiful sounding music that is contrary to God's heart, or something that we don't necessarily want to resonate with, and it may be beautiful, it may resonate with you heavily, but then there's also music that you probably don't even like there's hard rock Christian music, and I don't listen to that, but it helps somebody get there, and the content or the core of what it means is getting you closer to Christ. I want to ask a question though,